In our last video, we went over the basics of animating inside of 3ds Max and how we can set up our timeline in the different animation systems as far as auto key and set key, how to create keys, how to duplicate keys, move keys, select keys, all that kind of thing with both objects and biped a little bit. We also talked about how we can animate things like we talked about how we could animate things like colors, and we can talk about how we can animate modifiers. Well, we did talk about how we can animate parameters. And so today what I would like to do is go over the curve editor, a basic overview of the curve editor. And what this does is it gives us really powerful tools to change animation keys. So what I have here is a basic box, and I'm going to turn on my auto key because I really like to work in auto key. And I'm just going to create, maybe we'll make this a smaller animation, maybe 20 frames. Okay, and then on frame 20, maybe I want it to be somewhere over here. Maybe at frame 10, I want to raise it up a little bit. So we've got kind of like, and what I'm going to do is say like at frame 10, we're going to rotate, I'm going to say 180 degrees. And then at frame 20, I'm going to rotate another 180 degrees. So I kind of did like a flip. Okay, and maybe at the top there I want to scale, make it a little bit bigger, and I'm setting things up specifically so we can talk about them when we open up our curve editor. All right, so now I've got a little something. Now another important thing that you can use to help you, and I'm not sure if we've gone over it before, so we'll just go over it again, is called a trajectory. And maybe we'll even show onion skin. I think I've done one, but we'll see. All right, so with our trajectory, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. We can go to Object Properties. If we right-click on an object, go to Object Properties, we have a thing for trajectory here. And what this does is it shows us our movement throughout our animation range. Okay, it shows us our movement. So this is our loop for our translation. It doesn't really show anything for rotation or scale. So let's turn that off. Object Properties, going to turn trajectory off. We can also go into our display, and we also have trajectory under display properties. So we can do that there as well. So I'm going to turn it on just so we have something a little bit more interesting to look at. And then from here, I'm going to adjust this animation with the curve editor. Now our curve editor, if we go up to the top, curve editor, we're going to open that, and we have this graphical representation of our animation. And we have the box itself, position, rotation, and scale. We also have the box properties as far as length, width, height, segments, and whatnot. We also have some rendering things that we can do, and there's going to be some other things that we're going to add to it so we can talk about it. All right, so what we see is if I click on any one of these positions, if my graph is moving, if I have increase or decrease in my graph, that means that there is some kind of movement, whether it be translation, rotation, or scale. So on X position, you can see that I'm actually going lower in my numbers here. Okay, on my Y position, I'm straight across. Now straight across right here, there's no change. I'm still at 0 at the first frame. I'm 0 at the last frame. There's no movement there. So any one of these keys, although they're there, they don't make any change whatsoever. And we'll see that with our Z position. We have our height because we're kind of jumping upwards. Our X position, if we go to move, we can see our X axis, we're moving forward. Our Z axis, we're moving up. So that's if we can, let me see if I can do this. Our graph editor mimics what's going on in the scene, even if it doesn't look like it. So the X position, we have no change because we're not rotating on the X axis, and we're not rotating on the Z axis, but we are rotating on the Y axis. And here we can see our curve. Our scale, now our scale is a little bit different. It doesn't really, let's see if we can get it to do an X, Y, and Z. Let's see what happens here. So I'm going to scale this way, and we can see that we have another curve that showed up, and a third. Okay, but what we see is scale doesn't have the axis like rotation and position does. So we have to kind of figure out, okay, which one of these is it? And we can go back and remember in another video how we talked about the colors of the keys. So we know that, and with the scale, the color of the key represents the axis itself. So we have this curve here that's green, that corresponds to our y-axis, which is green, red X, and blue Z, so on and so forth. Okay, that's a little bit different than transform and rotation, because our position and rotation, because our position key is red on our time frame, and our rotation is green, and our scale is blue. So that's a little bit different, but it's not difficult at all to just remember those simple little facts. So in the curve editor, it's showing everything that's happening. So what I'm going to do is on our x-axis, I'm just going to move this key. So when I show it, this is a certain type of key. I believe it's smooth. No, not smooth. So we're going to auto tangents. Auto. So we have these that we can move, and we'll get over that. We'll get to that in just a minute. What I want to do is I want to move this key, and when I come to the cross, that's basically saying, hey, let's move this. We can do with it what we want. I can move it upper, or I can move it up. I can move it forward. I can move it down. I can do whatever I want. And the cool thing about the trajectory is that we can notice the change there. We've changed our animation, so now it looks different. We also see that in our trajectory, and that's one of the reasons why I really like to have the trajectory up there. So if I change this kind of back to where it was, then our curve is kind of back to where it was, and that trajectory will really help us to know where we need to change it. We can also take these little legs here, and you can see I'm changing the shape of my curve, which also changes my trajectory. Okay, so if I want it to be more rounded, my z-axis to be more rounded, I can do that. Now, we also have some things up here, and we're not going to go over everything, but let's go over some of these different type of curves that correspond to things that we can do with our key. So if I select that key, then by default it sets it to auto tangent, but I can change it to all kinds of things. Maybe I want to do linear, where it's just going to be straight across. You know, so if I wanted everything to be straight across, I can select all those keys and choose linear. And this is really good if you have a loop, because there's no, I mean, it's just going to go from one place to the other. It doesn't care about speed or whatever. Speed is going to be constant. This is really good for loops, where you want the beginning frame speed and the end frame speed, whatever values, to be the same, so you have that loop. Let's see, we also have stepped, and stepped is kind of, it's one you have to kind of wrap your head around. It doesn't really do anything until you get to that frame. So if we take a look at the X position, from 0 to 10, there is no movement whatsoever. But on 10, on that one frame, all of the movement happens. So step is a really good one for eyes. Our eyes jet very quickly. Our eyes are not very smooth when they move. So stair step is really good for eyes. And there's also been some animators that have experimented with using the stair step curves and animation to make it look like it's stop motion, where you have a lot of little bitty frames, but they're stair stepped in between. So you have a slight pause between each movement, and we kind of get that stop motion feel. So we can play around with these curves, and it changes our animation. So let's say maybe, let's just change it back to auto. And then here we can play with it how we want to. So I'm going to do ease in and ease out. We can do that with our curve editor. So the more I move this, the more ease in I have. The more end I do on our last frame, the more ease out I have. So there again, we have using some of the 12 principles of animation to make sure our animation is done correctly and looks how we want it to. And I'm just going to make this a little smoother. So we got a nice rounded top. Okay, so we've looked at X position. We can do the same thing with our rotation if we wanted to. We can change these curves to do things with our animation. Maybe we want less animation at the beginning of the end, so we want like a lot of spin, faster spin, and we can see we got a lot of spin there at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and change the pivot of this box. Okay, so that does change our animation. That's okay. We're still going to look how we want it to. So that when we spin, we're spinning on its axis instead of spinning from the base. Okay. So we can change any of these keys. If we want to add keys, we can. We can either add them in our timeline or we can add them here. So like, let's see. Add here at the beginning, we have the little key with a plus sign. So if we want to add a key, we can add a key there. Boop, added a key. Okay, we also see that it added it to our timeline. And then we can do with that what we want. So if we wanted to, you know, for instance, move this down, and we can change the way our rotation works. Okay. Now another thing that I want to go over is we can, because this is still a simplified, a primitive object, and we look at it in our modify tab, we still have our parameters. We also have our parameters here. So I can animate those as well. I can either auto key and change my parameters or set key and change my parameters, but I can also do it in the curve editor. So let's see what that looks like. So maybe for the width, which has nothing on it, I'm going to say at frame 10, I'm going to add a key at frame 10, and maybe I want to move that upwards. So we can already see, because this is another one of those things that because we're doing it in the curve editor, it's not going to add it at frame 20 or at frame 0 automatically. So we're going to go to frame 0. I'm going to add another key. If I create one here, then I can already see I went from a dotted line to a solid line. I'm going to change this back to 0. And I can change my value here if I want to. So 0. Value is 0. Now we can see that as I'm animating, I'm also changing the width. Okay, so you can do that with length, width, height, segments, anything, any parameter that can be animated can be changed there. Now let's take a look at something else. In the other animation video on how to basics of animation, we created a material. So let's see if there's a way that we can change our material inside of the curve editor. So I'm just going to turn on my auto key, and I'm going to change this material, the diffuse color of it, to like a blue, something that we can definitely tell has changed. And again, like in the other video, we have this red bracket around it, which tells us that it's been animated. And we see a red square around our material, which tells us, hey, you have animation mode on. Okay, so I didn't accept that. So let's change that. Say okay. All right, so now it's animated. And if I assign this material, see it's blue, and at the beginning it will go back to the orange that we had. Now let's see if we can change that in our curve editor. So let's open up our curve editor. And what we see now on our box is we have the name of a material, which is 01 default. If I want to go in and change it to exactly what it is, which I recommend to name everything in your scene. So let's say box underscore color. Okay, so box underscore color. What we'll see is that in our curve editor, it's changed to box underscore color. And then we have all kinds of parameters that we can change. So let's say shader basic, and we see our ambient diffuse have these little bars on there, which tells us, hey, there's a key on there. And if we look, we can see our red, green, and blue value has changed throughout our animation. Okay, and we can change those the same with the diffuse. Maybe I want that red to be a lot lower, that green to be a lot higher. And let's see what that does. We were kind of an orangish color before, and now we're more of a green color because we changed the value in our curve editor. So if there's a value, if there's something that can be animated inside of 3ds Max, most of the time it can be edited inside of a curve editor. One of the differences is that the biped you can't really do the same way. It's the curve editor doesn't really work with the biped like that, so we do have to do a little bit different if we wanted to do the curves inside of a biped. But that's not for this video. Instead, in the last video we talked about animating something, how to animate, and I suggested to have fun animating. And in this video, what I would suggest is to open up that curve editor and play around with those curves. figure out what each one of those different curves do, how you can change your curves. We can add keys, delete keys, move keys, and see if there's something that you figure out that you just cannot see inside of the curve editor. This is a really, really good tool to fine-tune your animations. So I would recommend that, and I would also say, have fun.